The wind whipped across the scorched wasteland, carrying with it the acrid stench of burnt stone and metal. Amid the ruins stood a human soldier clad in battered armor, his face lined with grit and weariness. He had fought too many battles on too many worlds, but he had never expected this one, to be confronted not by an enemy army, but by a trembling alien child. Her blue skin glowed faintly in the dusty sunlight, her silver hair tangled and streaked with ash. With eyes too wide for her small face, she clutched the hilt of a ceremonial blade and pressed it into his gauntleted hand. The soldier knelt, his own knees sinking into the cracked ground, staring into the child's pleading gaze. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 in human years, yet grief had aged her eyes. The blade she offered was no ordinary weapon. It hummed faintly with a strange energy, ancient and solemn, like the weight of generations forged into steel. He hesitated, recognizing that this was no act of childish impulse. The girl wasn't asking him to play hero. She was begging him to fight alongside her. "Please, mighty human," she whispered, her small voice breaking against the silence of the ruined streets. "They took my sister. They took her into the black fortress beyond the sands. I can't save her alone. You have to help me." Tears welled at the edges of her glowing eyes, and her hands shook as she tried to push the sword more firmly toward him. The soldier's throat tightened. He had faced monsters, tyrants, and mercenaries, but this cry of desperation from someone so innocent pierced deeper than any blade. For a long moment he didn't speak. He only studied her, watching the way her little fingers trembled around the hilt, how her lower lip quivered with both fear and determination. He could see she would have tried to storm that fortress on her own if he refused her. And that stubborn bravery reminded him of the comrades he had once lost in battle, soldiers who would never turn their backs on the helpless. He closed his hand over hers, steadying her grip on the blade, and gave a firm nod. "You have my word," he said at last, his voice gravelly from years of war yet softened with a promise. "We'll bring her back, together." The little girl's eyes widened when he accepted the sword. For the first time since she had run into him, her tears slowed. She clutched his armored hand tightly, as if afraid he might disappear the way her sister had. The soldier rose slowly to his feet, the blade gleaming faintly as though it had acknowledged its new bearer. He glanced down at the child, whose chin trembled but who stood tall, willing herself to be braver than her small frame allowed. He tightened the straps on his armor and adjusted his weapons, feeling the blade's strange weight resonate against his side. It was different from the human steel he was used to, humming like it carried its own heartbeat. The fortress she had spoken of was visible in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the blood-red horizon. Smoke curled from its battlements and shadows prowled its gates. He had stormed fortresses before, but none while carrying the hope of a child pressed into his soul. The girl walked beside him, clutching the edge of his armored gauntlet as if it were the only thing anchoring her to this world. Her tiny feet left light prints in the ash, and her hair blew wild in the bitter wind. He wanted to tell her to stay behind, that she would be safer waiting in the ruins, but he knew the words would break her. She needed to move forward, to believe she was part of saving her sister, and so he let her walk, though every step made his protective instincts flare. They passed the remains of her village, houses burned down to skeletal beams, and stone walls crumbling into dust. The soldier's jaw clenched. He had seen war leave scars like this across worlds, humans, aliens, it didn't matter. The cycle of destruction was always the same. Yet here, amidst the ruins, a child still stood, defiant in her grief. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not duty, not orders, but the will to fight for something that mattered. As they neared the edge of the wasteland, the fortress loomed larger. Its black towers seemed to scrape the sky, pulsing faintly with alien lights. Strange runes crawled across its gates, and an eerie hum carried on the wind. The soldier's hand brushed the blade at his side, and for a brief second, he swore it pulsed an answer. He glanced at the girl, who swallowed hard but nodded, her tiny fists clenched at her sides. "She's inside," she whispered. "I can feel her." The soldier studied her, realizing she was more than just a frightened child. Her kind, it seemed, had gifts, senses humans could not comprehend. If she could feel her sister through stone and shadow, then there was no denying the bond that tethered them. He crouched down to her level, his scarred face softened by the flickering light of the burning horizon. "Then lead the way," he told her. "I'll protect you from whatever's between us and her." Together they advanced, and with each step the air grew heavier, the heat more oppressive. The soldier kept scanning the horizon, every instinct screaming that they were being watched. Sure enough, movement flickered across the dunes, figures shifting in the shadows, armored creatures carrying jagged weapons that seemed forged from the same black stone as the fortress. The girl gasped, clutching his arm tightly. "They're the ones who took her," she whispered, voice trembling with both fear and rage. The soldier unsheathed the alien blade, its glow flaring brighter in the presence of enemies. He could feel its strange energy course through him, amplifying his strength, steadying his stance. The girl stepped back but didn't flee, her wide eyes locked on him with absolute trust. The first of the raiders let out a guttural roar, raising its weapon high as it charged. The soldier braced, raising the blade to meet it, and when steel and stone collided, sparks of otherworldly fire lit the battlefield. The fight was brutal but efficient. The soldier moved with the experience of countless battles, his strikes precise and merciless. But this was no ordinary swordplay. The alien blade seemed alive, guiding his hand, countering blows he hadn't even fully seen. The raiders fell one by one, dissolving into ash and shadow as the weapon cut them down. When the last enemy crumbled, silence returned to the wasteland, broken only by the girl's ragged breaths and the faint hum of the fortress beyond. He turned to her, chest heaving, and wiped the sweat and blood from his brow. She stared at him with awe, but her little chin lifted stubbornly. "You fight like my people's champions," she said softly. Maybe the blade chose you." He didn't reply, but deep down he wondered if she was right. He was just a soldier, human and mortal. But the sword in his hand seemed to think otherwise. He sheathed it again and gestured toward the looming gates. The fortress doors groaned open as they approached, as if the structure itself had sensed their coming. Shadows writhed within, whispering like voices carried on the wind. The soldier stepped forward, placing himself between the child and the darkness, his free hand on the hilt of the alien sword. The girl held tightly to his arm, her small frame trembling. She was terrified, but she didn't back away. The bond between them, forged in desperation, had already begun to harden into something unbreakable. Inside, the corridors stretched endlessly, carved from black stone and lit by cold blue fire. The soldier's footsteps echoed heavily, while the girl's were light and uncertain. Strange carvings ran along the walls, depictions of battles and sacrifices older than either of them could imagine. The girl's eyes darted to every shadow, searching for some sign of her sister. The soldier tightened his grip on the sword, ready for whatever came. His body was weary, but his spirit burned sharper than ever. A low growl echoed through the hall, sending shivers down the child's spine. Out of the darkness slithered a monstrous figure twice his height, armored in jagged plates. Its eyes glowed like embers, and in its hand was a chain that dragged behind it, attached to a cage barely large enough for a young girl. The soldier froze, his breath catching when he saw the terrified face peering through the bars. The child beside him let out a strangled cry. "That's her! That's my sister!" The monster laughed, a sound like crumbling stone, and jerked the chain so the cage rattled violently. The prisoner inside screamed, her small blue hands gripping the bars. The soldier moved without hesitation, stepping forward with the alien blade drawn. The girl clutched his arm, but her eyes blazed with desperate hope. She looked up at him, trembling, and whispered, "Please, don't let them take her from me." He glanced down, his jaw set, and nodded once. "They won't, I swear it." The creature lunged, dragging the cage forward as if to use it as a shield. The soldier gritted his teeth and shifted his stance, ready for a fight unlike any he'd faced before. The sword in his hand pulsed brighter, as if sensing the stakes of this moment. He could feel the child's faith in him like a second heartbeat, steadying his resolve. He wasn't fighting for glory, for orders, or even for survival. He was fighting for two little sisters who deserved to be together again. The monster dragged the cage forward, its jagged armor scraping sparks against the stone floor. The soldier raised his blade high, feeling its hum grow into a steady roar, as if it too hungered for the fight. The little girl pressed herself against the wall, her wide eyes locked on her sister's prison. She wanted to scream, to run to her, but she forced herself still, trusting in the human warrior who stood like an unbreakable wall between them and the beast. The first clash shook the hall. The monster swung its massive weapon, a cleaver forged from black stone that dripped with some glowing ichor. The soldier met the blow head-on, sparks exploding as alien steel met enchanted rock. The impact rattled his bones, but his stance held firm. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his muscles screaming against the force. The creature growled, surprised at the resistance, and for a brief moment, the cage slid closer to the sisters' reunion. With a roar, the soldier countered, slashing the alien blade in an upward arc. The weapon responded like lightning, carving through the monster's armor and sending shards clattering to the ground. The beast recoiled, but not for long. Its glowing eyes narrowed, and it bellowed in rage before sweeping the chain attached to the cage. The metal links cracked against the walls and floor, creating shockwaves that knocked the child off her feet. She cried out, but the soldier pivoted, shielding her from debris. The girl scrambled back to her feet, clutching the wall for balance, her tiny frame trembling. She stared at her sister's cage, desperation burning brighter than fear. "Don't stop!" she shouted, her small voice echoing off the stone. The soldier glanced at her, seeing fire in those young eyes. He nodded once before charging again, swinging the blade in wide arcs that illuminated the corridor in flashes of blue light. Every strike was fueled not only by his strength but by her unyielding belief in him. The battle raged with ferocity. The creature's weapon shattered the ground, sending cracks spidering across the floor. The soldier moved swiftly, ducking and rolling beneath swings that could have split him in half. Each time he struck, the alien sword sang louder, as if thrilled by the fight. The monster staggered, its armor weakening under the relentless assault. Still it fought on, its strength seemingly endless, its roars shaking the very walls of the fortress. The soldier's breathing grew ragged, sweat dripping down his face beneath the weight of his armor. He knew he couldn't keep this pace forever, but he also knew he didn't have to. His eyes flicked to the cage where the second child gripped the bars, her small face streaked with tears. The soldier's heart clenched. He wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to give these sisters back to each other. Failure was unthinkable. Summoning his remaining strength, he feinted left, then swung hard to the right, the blade cutting deep into the creature's arm. The monster howled, its cleaver crashing to the floor. The soldier pressed the advantage, hammering blow after blow into its chest, each strike chipping away at the dark armor until finally, with a deafening crack, the plates shattered. The beast staggered, clutching its chest, black ichor spilling between its claws. But even wounded, it wasn't finished. With a final desperate roar, the monster swung the chain with all its might, the cage whipping toward the wall. The trapped girl screamed as she was thrown about inside. The soldier's heart lurched. If the cage shattered against the stone, the child inside could be crushed. He threw himself forward, alien blade flashing, and with one precise strike he sliced clean through the chain. The cage skidded to a stop, safe but trembling. The creature reeled back, unbalanced now that its weapon was severed. The soldier seized his moment. He charged, the alien sword glowing so brightly it seemed to burn the shadows away. With a guttural cry, he drove the blade straight into the beast's chest. The air trembled with the force of the strike, and the monster let out one last scream before dissolving into ash and shadow, leaving only silence and the echo of its defeat behind. The sword dimmed. Its hunger sated as the soldier collapsed to one knee. His chest heaved, exhaustion pressing heavy on his shoulders, but he forced himself to rise again. The two girls were watching him, their faces pale, their eyes wide with awe and relief. Slowly, he sheathed the blade and turned to the cage, kneeling beside it as he examined the lock. "It's over," he murmured, voice rough. "She's safe now." The first child rushed forward, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pressed her small hands against the bars. "Sister, it's me!" "I came back for you." The prisoner inside sobbed, reaching through the gaps to clutch her hand. The soldier's throat tightened at the sight. He drew his knife and jammed it into the lock, twisting until the mechanism snapped. The door swung open with a creak, and the younger girl stumbled out into her siblings' waiting arms. The reunion was raw and powerful. The sisters clung to each other, crying into each other's shoulders, their small bodies shaking with relief. The soldier looked away, giving them a moment of privacy, but the sound of their laughter through tears filled his chest with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For a moment, the war, the fortress, the pain, all of it disappeared. There was only family reunited by sheer will and sacrifice. When the soldier finally spoke, his voice was soft. "We have to move. More of them will come." The older sister looked up at him, her tear-streaked face shining with gratitude. She held her younger sibling's hand tightly as if she'd never let go again. "We'll follow you," she said, her voice steadier now. "You're our protector." The soldier shook his head. "No, I was just the sword. You were the courage." but the girl only smiled faintly as if she knew the truth ran deeper. They made their way back through the corridors, the soldier leading with the alien blade drawn. Strange whispers still echoed through the fortress, but none dared approach. It was as if the death of their champion had broken the spirit of the shadowed forces within. The soldier kept his eyes sharp, his body tense, but with each step hope burned brighter. The sisters held on to each other, their small hands intertwined, walking side by side for the first time since the abduction. At last they emerged into the dying light of the wasteland. The fortress loomed behind them, silent now, its fires smoldering low. The soldier turned, gazing at the horizon where the sun sank in streaks of red and gold. The girls stood beside him, their hair glinting in the light, their faces lifted with hope instead of despair. The younger one clutched his gauntlet with both hands, her tiny voice whispering, "Thank you, mighty human. You brought her back." The soldier knelt, resting a heavy hand on each of their shoulders. His voice was rough but steady. "I only did what had to be done. You're safe now, that's all that matters." The older girl's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "No," she said softly. "You fought for us when no one else would. That matters more than you know." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing into his heart. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a man who made a choice to protect. As night fell, the soldier guided them toward the ruins where other survivors might still be hiding. The alien blade glowed faintly at his side, no longer hungry but watchful. The sisters clung to each other, whispering to ease their fears, but every so often they glanced up at him with eyes filled with unwavering trust. In their world he had become something more than just human. He was hope, shaped in steel and sacrifice. And though the path ahead was uncertain, the soldier knew one truth with unshakable clarity. As long as he lived, no harm would come to them again. He would be their shield, their sword, and their unwavering protector, for in their desperate cry he had found not just a mission, but a reason to keep fighting. For them, and for the fragile thread of light that still existed in the galaxy's darkest places. The trek across the wasteland was brutal. The ground was uneven, littered with the bones of burned-out villages and the remains of long-forgotten battles. The soldier walked ahead, his eyes scanning every shadow, the alien blade glowing faintly as if guiding their path. Behind him, the sisters clung to one another, their bare feet blistered and their voices hushed as they whispered songs their mother had once sung to them. The sound was fragile but steady, like a thread of hope in a world that had tried to tear them apart. The wind howled across the barren plain, carrying with it the distant cries of creatures that lurked beyond the dunes. The soldier tightened his grip on the sword, his instincts sharp as ever. He knew the fortress's fall wouldn't go unanswered. The shadows within would regroup and vengeance would follow. Still, each glance at the girls renewed his resolve. They trusted him completely, and that trust was a weight he would never let slip. The older sister walked with surprising resilience, holding her younger sibling close whenever she stumbled. Her small shoulders straightened with pride, as though she bore not only her sister's safety but also the legacy of her people. Every so often, she glanced at the soldier with eyes full of quiet determination. He could tell she was already shaping herself into something more than a survivor. She was becoming a leader, inspired by his stand against the darkness. Night fell hard, the stars shimmering faintly against a sky painted in indigo and silver. They made camp among the ruins of a collapsed watchtower, where fragments of stone provided shelter from the wind. The soldier lit a small fire, its flickering warmth casting shadows against their tired faces. The sisters curled beside each other, sharing a blanket of torn cloth. Yet their eyes remained on him as if they couldn't close them until they saw he was still near. The soldier stared into the flames, lost in thoughts he rarely allowed himself. He remembered the faces of comrades he had lost, the weight of battles fought under orders that meant nothing in the end. Yet here in this forgotten world he had acted not for duty but for choice. That choice had saved 2 children who now looked at him as more than a soldier. They saw him as the answer to a desperate prayer. For the first time in years he felt something stir deep within, the possibility of redemption. At dawn they moved again. The younger sister, though weary, smiled faintly as she walked, her small hand gripping his gauntlet as though he were a fortress made flesh. Every step seemed lighter now that they were together again. The soldier caught himself returning the smile just for a moment, before forcing his expression back to one of focus. He couldn't afford softness yet. They were not safe, not until he returned them to their people. By midday they crested a hill, and there, across the valley, stood what remained of a settlement. It was small, battered by war, but it was alive. Smoke rose from chimneys, and faint figures moved among the buildings. The sisters gasped, tears welling in their eyes. "Home," the older one whispered. The soldier paused, taking in the sight. It wasn't much, but it was sanctuary. He tightened his grip on the sword, scanning the horizon for threats before leading them down the slope. As they approached, the settlement stirred. Survivors emerged cautiously, their expressions wary and hardened from loss. Weapons were raised when they saw the human figure leading two of their own. But then the girls broke free, running into the crowd with cries of recognition. Shouts rose as families realized who they were. The little ones were pulled into trembling arms, kissed and held as if they had returned from the dead. The soldier stood back, silent, watching the reunion unfold. The people soon noticed him. Dozens of alien eyes turned toward the human warrior, their gazes heavy with both suspicion and gratitude. The older sister, still clutching her younger sibling, turned back and raised her voice. "He saved us. He fought the darkness when no one else would. He brought us home." Her words rang clear, her small frame trembling with conviction. Murmurs spread through the crowd, suspicion softening into awe. Slowly the weapons lowered. An elder stepped forward, her face marked with years and grief. She studied the human in silence before bowing her head. "You carry the blade," she said softly. "It has not chosen one in generations. Yet it chose you, a human, to wield it." Her voice shook with emotion. "Our people owe you a debt that can never be repaid." The soldier shook his head, his voice rough. "I didn't do it for debts. I did it because they needed me." The elder's lips curved into the faintest smile, and she placed her hand over her heart. "Then you are not only a warrior, you are kin." The crowd murmured in agreement, some bowing, others pressing their hands to their chests in their people's gesture of respect. The soldier shifted uncomfortably, unused to such reverence. But when the sisters looked at him, their smiles wide through their tears, he felt the weight of their gratitude settle deep in his soul. That night, the settlement held a vigil. Fires burned high and voices rose in song, mourning the lost and celebrating the returned. The sisters sat at the soldier's side, never letting go of his hands. He listened to their people's chants, strange and melodic, weaving through the night air like a promise. For once he did not feel like an outsider. He felt in some small way like he belonged. The younger girl leaned against his arm, her eyelids heavy with sleep. "You're not just mighty," she murmured softly. "You're kind." The words pierced deeper than any blade ever had. He glanced at her, then at her sister, who watched him with quiet, knowing eyes. He didn't answer, but his silence carried the truth. He didn't need titles, didn't need glory. He only needed to ensure they would wake tomorrow in safety. As dawn painted the sky in hues of gold, the soldier stood at the edge of the village, staring toward the horizon where the fortress still loomed in the distance. Though silent now, he knew darkness never truly died. More battles would come, and he would face them. But when he looked back at the sisters playing near the fire, laughter in their voices, he realized those battles no longer defined him. Protecting them did. The elder approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Stay," she urged. "Our people would welcome you. We would stand stronger with you among us." He looked at her, torn. Part of him longed for rest, for a place where he was more than a weapon. But another part knew his path might always be that of a wanderer, carrying hope from one desperate soul to another. He remained silent, the choice unspoken. As the day stretched on, the sisters continued to cling to him, their bond to him unshakable. The older one whispered, "You're our family now. Even if you go, you'll always be." Her words sank into his heart, rooting deeper than any medal or honor ever had. He finally allowed himself a small smile, nodding to her. "Then I'll carry you with me wherever I go." That evening, the settlement's children gathered around him, listening wide-eyed as the sisters recounted the tale of their rescue. They spoke of his bravery, of the monster's defeat, of the moment he cut the chains and set them free. The children gasped and cheered, their young hearts swelling with hope. For the first time in generations, they believed in heroes again, and the soldier, weary though he was, felt the warmth of their belief kindle something inside him, long thought dead. As the stars returned, he lay awake beneath them, the alien blade resting beside him. It pulsed faintly as though it too was alive, whispering of battles yet to come. He closed his eyes, listening not to the echoes of war, but to the soft breathing of the sisters as they slept safely nearby. That sound, more than any song or promise, told him everything he needed to know. He had done something that mattered. The human soldier, scarred by war and haunted by loss, had answered a child's desperate cry. In doing so, he had saved more than 2 lives. He had reignited hope in a people on the brink of despair. And as the night carried on, he understood at last that this was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning, for wherever innocent voices cried out in the darkness, he would be there. Not because he was ordered to, not because he was mighty, but because he was human, and that in itself was enough to change the galaxy.